Every mask we wear eventually cracks, and when it does, we're forced to confront the truth we've been hiding behind applause. The end of the act isn't humiliation, it's the first breath of freedom. Every dramatic performance hides a deep fear of insignificance. You have to understand this. People don't just act out for no reason. When someone becomes exaggerated in their emotions, when they inflate every gesture, every sorrow, every triumph, what you're actually seeing is not confidence, it's compensation. It's the desperate attempt to drown out a quiet voice inside that whispers, asterisk, you don't matter. Asterisk, that's the root of it, the fear of being irrelevant, unseen, unacknowledged. And so, to silence that inner accusation, the person becomes louder, brighter, more noticeable. They turn their existence into a form of protest against their own invisibility. Think about it. A person who truly knows their worth doesn't need to announce it. They move quietly, calmly, because their sense of value isn't dependent on who's watching. But the histrionic personality, the one who constantly dramatizes, lives in the shadow of an internal void. Every act of exaggeration is an unconscious plea. Asterisk, please tell me I matter. Please notice me. Please affirm that I exist. Asterisk, it's not arrogance. It's fear dressed as flamboyance. It's the tragedy of someone who's convinced that being invisible is the same as being nothing. This fear often begins early, in childhood, when a person learns that attention is the only form of love they can reliably get. Maybe they had to perform to earn it, to cry louder, to smile brighter, to always be impressive, entertaining, or pitiable enough to draw someone's eyes. And once that link is forged between being seen and being valued, it becomes an identity. They begin to equate the absence of attention with the absence of worth. That's a dangerous belief, because it means their very sense of existence depends on constant validation. So when you encounter someone who's always on, always trying to make a scene out of their own life, you're not looking at a confident person, you're looking at someone fighting against the abyss of self-doubt. They believe that if they stop performing, they'll disappear. And the cruel irony is that the more they perform, the more disconnected they become from the genuine self that could actually anchor them. They become a mask with no face behind it, an echo with no original voice. It's easy to judge such people, to call them shallow, dramatic, or manipulative. But that's a mistake, because beneath all that showmanship is pain. It's the pain of someone who has never been seen for who they are, only for what they display. And that pain is excruciating. When you've spent your life being rewarded for appearances rather than essence, you lose touch with your own reality. You begin to live as a reflection of what others expect, not as the person you truly are. The self becomes fragmented, scattered across the perceptions of others. This is why histrionic behavior often feels hollow, even to the person living it. They might achieve the attention they crave, but it doesn't satisfy them for long. The applause fades quickly, and the silence that follows is unbearable. Because deep down, they know that what's being loved isn't them, it's the performance. And so they have to do it again, louder this time, more extravagant, more emotional, more impossible to ignore. It's a cycle of desperation masquerading as confidence. At its core, this fear of insignificance is the fear of being unseen by the world and, more profoundly, by oneself. When you've defined your value through the gaze of others, you've surrendered the ability to see yourself clearly. You become a mirror that only reflects external approval. That's the tragedy of it, to live your life entirely in reaction to the audience, never realizing that the only eyes that truly matter are your own. The need for attention is a defense against vulnerability. When a person constantly seeks to be noticed, praised, or admired, it's rarely because they simply enjoy being in the spotlight. It's because the spotlight feels safer than the shadows where their true insecurities live. Attention becomes a kind of armor, a shield that protects them from the terror of being emotionally exposed. To be vulnerable means to be open to rejection, to be hurt, to be truly seen without filters. And that is unbearable for someone who has learned that exposure leads to pain. So instead, they substitute performance for honesty. They create a version of themselves designed to attract validation rather than intimacy. Attention feels like connection, but it isn't. It's a counterfeit form of closeness, a way of being seen without ever being known. When someone builds their identity on attention, they're not seeking understanding, they're seeking protection. The gaze of others distracts from the quiet places within where they feel small, uncertain, unworthy. As long as the world is looking, they don't have to look inward. As long as people are clapping, they can silence the inner voice that whispers, asterisk, you're not enough. Asterisk. The irony, of course, is that the louder the applause becomes, the more hollow it feels. Because attention can never fill the void it's meant to hide, this defense mechanism is deeply psychological. Vulnerability requires trust, the belief that revealing your weaknesses won't destroy you, but for many that trust was broken long ago. Maybe their early attempts to open up were met with ridicule, indifference, or punishment. They learned that the safest way to exist was to stay behind a mask. And when that mask also happened to attract admiration or sympathy, it became not just a defense, but an identity. The person learns to manipulate attention as a way to manage fear. They perform strength when they feel weak, charm when they feel unworthy, outrage when they feel ignored. Every exaggerated emotion becomes a tactic to keep others engaged, to prevent them from seeing the trembling self behind the curtain. The need for attention is, at its root, the refusal to feel the rawness of being human. Vulnerability is messy, it's uncertain, it doesn't guarantee approval. Attention, on the other hand, offers a temporary illusion of control. You can control how others see you, you can shape the narrative, you can become whatever earns you the most validation. But you can't build genuine connection from that. You can't grow when every interaction is filtered through the need to protect your image. The person becomes trapped in a loop of external reinforcement, never allowing the inner self to emerge. And underneath it all, there's fear, fear of being ordinary, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being rejected for what you truly are. So instead of exposing that fear, people amplify themselves. They seek attention as a substitute for intimacy, mistaking the gaze of others for genuine acceptance. Attention becomes the drug that numbs the ache of vulnerability, even as it slowly erodes the capacity to be real. Authenticity requires the courage to be ordinary. In a world that constantly rewards performance, it takes immense bravery to simply exist without embellishment. Most people are terrified of being seen as average, as unremarkable, as just another person trying to make sense of life. They chase uniqueness like it's a moral duty, desperate to stand out, to be extraordinary in some visible way. But that obsession with being special often becomes the very thing that keeps them from discovering who they actually are. Authenticity isn't about being impressive, it's about being honest. It's the willingness to stand in the truth of your imperfection without trying to disguise it behind a performance or a mask. The ordinary self is the most difficult thing to accept because it lacks the glitter that draws admiration. It doesn't provoke applause, it doesn't capture attention, and it doesn't make headlines, but it's real. And that reality, however unremarkable it may seem, is where depth begins. To be authentic, you have to let go of the craving to appear more interesting than you are. You have to face the discomfort of being unnoticed, of existing without external confirmation of your worth. That's the crucible of authenticity, the silent space where no one is clapping, no one is watching, and you're forced to confront the raw truth of your own being. It's not that people don't want to be genuine, it's that they fear what will happen when they stop pretending. The fear runs deep. What if the real me isn't enough? What if my ordinary self is boring, flawed, or forgettable? These questions haunt the mind, pushing it to construct elaborate personas to hide behind. But every time you inflate yourself to appear extraordinary, you trade a piece of your authenticity for approval. You sell your truth for validation, and each sale leaves you emptier than before. The courage to be ordinary means refusing that transaction. It means accepting that your value isn't something that can be heightened through display. When you embrace ordinariness, you begin to move from performance to presence. You start to see that real strength doesn't need to advertise itself. You discover that peace isn't found in admiration, but in integrity and knowing that what others see is aligned with what you are. And that alignment is rare because it requires deep honesty. It requires acknowledging the parts of yourself that don't shine, that don't impress, that simply times are asterisk. That's the kind of courage most people run from because it means surrendering the illusion of control over how others perceive you. The truth is that every attempt to seem extraordinary is, at its root, an attempt to escape the vulnerability of being human. But there is profound beauty in that vulnerability. To be ordinary is to belong to the shared experience of all people, to struggle, to fail, to hope, to try again. It's the foundation upon which authenticity rests, and without it, every performance eventually collapses under its own falseness. Real strength comes from facing, not disguising, one's weakness. Most people misunderstand what strength actually is. They think it's about control, dominance, or the ability to appear unshaken in the face of difficulty. But that's not strength, that's the illusion of it. True strength is something quieter, something far more painful. It's found in the willingness to confront the things about yourself that you would rather avoid. It's the ability to look directly at your flaws, your fears, your failures, and not flinch away. That's what makes a person formidable, not their perfection, but their capacity to endure the truth about themselves. Disguising weakness is the most common and most destructive habit people fall into. They spend enormous energy maintaining an image of competence, confidence, or moral superiority, all while silently terrified of being exposed. The tragedy is that this act of concealment drains them. They become imprisoned by the very mask they wear. The more they try to hide their vulnerabilities, the more those vulnerabilities control them. Because anything you refuse to face grows stronger in the dark. It festers in denial, feeding off the energy you spend avoiding it. Real strength begins the moment you stop pretending, when you turn toward the things you fear and say, "This is part of me, and I will face it." The confrontation with weakness is humbling. It dismantles pride, it shatters illusion, and it forces you to admit that you are limited, fallible, and fragile. But paradoxically, that admission is the birth of power. When you stop wasting energy on denial, that same energy becomes available for growth. You begin to see that weakness isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. Every flaw reveals where strength must be developed. Every failure points to where understanding must deepen. The person who hides from their weakness stays shallow because they never allow pain to do its work. The person who faces it, however, becomes resilient in a way that can't be faked. It takes courage to admit you are not as strong as you pretend to be. It takes even greater courage to let others see it, because vulnerability exposes you to judgment, to rejection, to misunderstanding. But without that exposure, you can't grow. You remain a performance, a projection of strength rather than a source of it. True resilience comes from integration, not concealment. It's when all the broken parts are brought into the light and accepted that they lose their power to dominate you. You can't master what you refuse to acknowledge. You can't heal what you keep hidden. The hardest thing a person can do is to stand unguarded before their own weakness and not run away. But that's where transformation begins. That's where you find the kind of strength that endures, the strength that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove, and doesn't depend on illusion. It's the quiet strength of someone who has looked into their own darkness and chosen honesty over pride. Redemption begins where the performance ends. There comes a point in life when you realize that everything you've built to protect yourself, the charm, the bravado, the exaggerated emotions, the carefully crafted identity, has become a prison. You start to see that all the energy you've spent trying to be seen, trying to be understood, trying to be admired, has only taken you further from the truth of who you are. The performance that once felt like survival now feels suffocating. And it's in that moment of collapse, when the act can no longer be maintained, that redemption quietly begins to stir. When the performance ends, there's silence. It's an uncomfortable silence at first because it's filled with everything you've been avoiding. You begin to hear your own thoughts without the noise of validation. You begin to feel emotions that had been drowned beneath the constant need to appear composed or interesting or superior. The silence feels like loss, but it's actually the clearing away of illusions. It's what remains after the applause fades. When you have no one left to impress and nowhere left to hide, that's where truth lives, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet confrontation with yourself. Most people don't realize how exhausting their performances are until they stop. The persona becomes heavy, unsustainable, and when it finally drops, there's a sense of grief, because you've lived through that identity for so long that losing it feels like dying. But it's also a kind of rebirth. You begin to see that the person behind the mask, the one who makes mistakes, who struggles, who doubts, is the one who's actually capable of healing. The performance was never designed to heal you, it was designed to protect you. Redemption doesn't come from being flawless or admirable, it comes from being honest enough to let the false layers fall away. When you stop performing, something extraordinary happens. The distance between who you are and who you pretend to be begins to close. You no longer need to distort yourself to fit the expectations of others. You no longer need to exaggerate pain to earn sympathy or exaggerate virtue to earn respect. You begin to live in alignment with what's real. And though that reality may be uncomfortable, it's also liberating. Because truth, even when it's painful, is lighter to carry than illusion. The end of performance is the beginning of integrity. It's the return to simplicity, to saying what you mean, feeling what you feel, and doing what you believe to be right without the need for applause. In that space, redemption takes root. It grows not through recognition, but through humility. Not through perfection, but through sincerity. When you no longer need to be seen as good, you can finally begin to become good. And in that quiet transformation, the performance that once defined your life gives way to something far more powerful, a genuine existence, grounded in truth rather than validation.